Hey everybody, before we get started, just remind you this episode of part of our patrons like Aga Comics, Blacklist OG, Qua, Jeremy Vasquez, Kylie Denton, Nestor Flores, Rogue Robin, Shawnee P, Soda Sono for 2 Fair and Video Game 75. If you like what you want to see us do more, consider supporting Patreon. You get access to episodes early and lots of other goodies and really helps us out. Thank you for your support, everybody. Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. It is time once again to talk about Legend of the Five Rings, the role-playing game by Fantasy Flight Games for now. I actually don't know what the branding will be when they switch to Edge. Anyway, hi, it's me. I might sound slightly hot and tired, and you might maybe hear my fan in the background. I don't think so, really, but you might a little. Whatever, it's hot, okay? It's super hot. It's way too hot for March, but it is what it is. Hope everybody is staying safe and healthy out there. And, well, at least we can say that a kind of good thing that happened somewhere in this mess is that, in fact, the PDF of Path of Waves came out. Finally. Thus, I have purchased Path of Waves and have read and reviewed it. Took me a couple days. I had to wait for some money stuff to get sorted out. Excuse me. Sorry. And then, actually, read it and review it and whatnot. Work through all this stuff. But, I'm here. Gonna give you kind of a chapter-by-chapter breakdown as well as an overview of my whole thoughts on the book. This is a 7-chapter, long-form book. It's a big boy. About, 250 pages. So, similar in size and depth to Emerald Empire. Arguably even more deep, though slightly more narrow focus. Path of Waves bills itself as the essential guide to Ronin, and indeed, there is a lot of, and here's how Rhodes do about this, and this is about Ronin, and there's lots of fluff and flavor text about Ronin, but a lot of it you can apply to other low-status games, whether that's gaijin, or, there's a lot of that stuff in there. We'll talk about that. Or peasants, even, or as far up as, how do lorded clan samurai deal with Ronin-type stuff, because the game really emphasizes that everybody has their own little ways of interacting with Ronin, and kind of, what kind of jobs they might do, or where they might be, or what they might be doing when they're not doing jobs. So, as enemies, allies, obstacles, all that stuff can be kind of extrapolated from this, and there's a lot of little details and high-yield stuff you can pull from in Path of Waves. It's a great book. I highly recommend it. Right out of the top, high-level thoughts. Much like Emerald Empire, I think, maybe you could skip if you're not going to do a Shadowlands campaign. Maybe you can skip Shadowlands. If you're not going to do, if you don't think you want Courts of Stone, heck, you might even go and, well, I don't know. Courts of Stone has some mechanics that dovetail into Path of Waves, or vice versa. But they may or may not be essential, depending on what you're thinking. A lot of people complain, for instance, that some of the fluff in the start of Courts of Stone is just is essentially reprinted or rephrased, though I think there are some important bits in there from Emerald Empire. Path of Waves is really up there as a very useful guide, whether or not you're running a Ronin game, and especially if you are going to run a Ronin or Rise from Dust, as it were, out of the core book game, you're going to want this one because it offers a lot of stuff. So let's go ahead and kind of jump through the chapters to kind of outline what's in it and why you might like it. My thoughts, good and bad, about all that. Because there are a couple of, I feel like every new book, there's a couple of things that some people are like, was this edited right? Or is this correct? Or should I allow this on my table? We'll cover a couple of those few ones. I don't think it's particularly egregious in any of them. There are a couple of items that seem a little faulty, or maybe there was a little bit of editing rush, but there's two reasons I don't want to throw stones about that. One, as a longtime fan of Fantasy Flight Games, I know they're awful with tables, and it was, at this point, it was they're never going to get better. Maybe they will get better, I don't know, because they're going to transfer RPGs over to Edge. But, overall, that was something I don't want to throw stones. And also, there obviously was a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff going on that may have detracted from the work and kind of distracted from it in points. That said, there are a couple of things you might want to catch if you're a game master. And if you're a player, there are a couple of things you don't want to be an asshole about. So, as usual, there's an intro, there's some opening fiction, there's kind of the rough outline. There is a map. Let me pop this up to big. It does show a couple of different little places where they maybe should be or shouldn't be. There's the sample city, Hirosaka. It says where that normally is. Twin Blessings is normally up there because that fits with Sins of Regret. Sorry, the name escaped me for the adventures. I haven't really bought any of those. Just because that's not my style to do pre-runs. But, you could make some stuff work about some different places and move some stuff around. So, there's that. And then the first chapter is the life of the Ronin. This, I think, is a pretty big and important... Well, actually, I don't know if it's literally big. It's, from page 8, right? Page 8-ish? to page 30, so about 20-ish pages. But still, it covers a lot of important things. So, first off, it explains a lot of the different ways one can become a Ronin. There are more than you'd think. And this is very important because there are some people in the wider community who are like, man, why are so many people's lords dying? Why are they all dead? Or it's highly unrealistic there are so many Ronin. By the way, there's a sidebar for that. I appreciate that they put it in. It's way in the back of the book. I feel like it should be stapled to the front of every book, but it's like, yo, this isn't... It's kind of an expansion of the old Rokugan is not Japan theme, and basically it's like, hey, this isn't meant to be historical emulation, guys. It's meant to be an emulation of a pop culture genre. It's taken more from movies and literature and, manga and anime about Japanese history and folklore and other East Asian history and folklore than it is from, real life, so calm your tits. But basically, there's a lot of different ways you can become a Ronin. You can get branded a Ronin. Your lord cannot have enough money to pay you, basically, and thus you're forced to go down. You can go on a martial pilgrimage and never come back. You can voluntarily leave your lord rather than commit seppuku because your death would be meaningless. And then there's the whole, well, hey, if your lord dies and he didn't outline a proper heir, technically you have no lord, which means that it's not proper for you to just necessarily do the whole thing. There's also talking about how peasants can basically become Ronin, and of course being born a Ronin. What you do on the road, why people might be traveling or pilgrimaging, martial pilgrims, mercenaries, criminals, for instance. Talking about how Ronin relate to Bushido if you wish to play an honorable Ronin. Talks a lot about the kind of work you can get and stories about them. This reminds me a lot of the specialization books from the Star Wars RPG, where they talk about, hey, here's plot hooks for your thing. The word Shadow Warrior or Kagemusha is dropped. It can be a body double. It also talks about how every clan relates with Ronin, and kind of how every clan uses them, and how even a lot of the clans can even have empathy with Ronin. There's a funny note that the Phoenix clan interact with Ronin the least because of their nature, but also they tend to produce the most Ronin because, hey, guess what? Your high-stress academic lifestyle means that some people can decide that, nah, dude, what if I just wandered out into the woods and hit people with a sword instead of staying inside all the time? It talks about relationships with the peasantry. It has a couple of pages on the Perfect Land sect, kind of outlining what they're about, repeating some of their history, mentioning the various sutras they talk about. The second chapter is creating a character. This contains an entirely new way of doing the 20 questions to build yourself in a way that makes more sense for a Ronin game and other similar ideas. You could adapt it to normal clan play. I think the regular version works for that, though, because that kind of presumes that, hey, you grew up in a clan's lands with in a family's holdings, that actually kind of emphasizes the whole through line of clan and family, which is, compared to Ronin, an especially big deal for clan samurai. But it includes, basically, as opposed to clan, you have a number of regions you could have come with. They give all the same bonuses that a clan would, but they talk about stuff like influencing what does your character know, your upbringing. So you've got stuff like urban, farmland, coastal, whether that's sea, rivers, or lakes, forests, mountains, haunted region if you want to do some spookum stuff. And then there's kind of an outline for the fact that if you're a gaijin, you might have some different stuff that depends on where you're going. So there's rules for playing an ujik, playing Kamarists, playing Yoda of the Ghostlands, and playing a member of... Oh, I've never been good at the Indian-style names. The Pavyatapura? I think I got all the vowels in there. There's a lot of A's. Sorry. Basically, their class they're the urbane Ivory kingdoms. One of the biggest cities that has a major focus in there. In some of the fluff stuff we'll talk about later. But so there's a couple samples, and then there are, later there is a sketch outline for how to make your own culture. If you wanted to model some of the cultures that are mentioned, for instance, in the appendix of the Unicorn novella, there are a lot of worlds around the Kamarist Caliphate, which are mentioned if you wanted to build them, or you wanted to introduce a whole new culture. So there's a lot of style there. Next is upbringing. This kind of replaces your family block, but kind of, works out how you... Sorry. Sleep's been a little goofy lately. But you get your whole upbringing thing, and it should note that the game has a sidebar about who knows about your upbringing. So you could be a craftsperson, a farmer, a fallen noble, which basically models as if you were raised in a clan. Hunters or fishers, geisha house, hinin. Law enforcement if you grew up as like a yoriki or a doshin or something. Military upbringing, Ronin family, organized crime, street urchin, temples, tradespersons kind of stuff. So a lot of good stuff. Their school choices, they talk about the roles. The roles are kind of given in a Ronin context, but and it kind of emphasizes that these should be your basic schools, but you can obviously substitute other schools, depending. There is a new role, Sages. This was kind of, as I theorized, seeing that Sage was going to be a role. But basically, Sage is like Monk or Shugenja. It's for characters who have a mystical or supernatural bent, but the nature of their powers is outside of Rokugan's understanding. So they may be like, say, the Ujik Diviner school, where those are tagged as Sage. They can use invocations, but the way they do them is different than how a Shugenja would understand invocations. So, for instance, if you wanted to play a gaijin sorcerer who uses alchemy or foreign invocations, like a traditional name sorcerer, as we've even seen in the Unicron novella, we met a couple of those people, that would probably be a Sage-tagged school using only certain invocations. But also it can be like Monk, they might use Kiho or rituals or other stuff through means that are not necessarily understood by normal Rokugani. I don't know how many more schools we'll see with that tag, but it's a good tag to add, I think, overall. So then we got the new schools. A lot of them are pretty typical, and I think they're pretty good for various Ronin things. You've got the Wandering Blade, which you focus on a weapon category, and that's basically while you were off partying, I was studying the blade kind of thing. They're very highly focused on their particular style of weapon. They have a lot of earth focus in their various katas and techniques that are picked out. And just in general, they focus very tightly on having a signature weapon and that being their style. In addition to being a perfectly good Ronin school, if you wanted to focus down, as opposed to say Worldly Ronin in the core book, if you wanted to focus down on being a Bushi Ronin, like focus on that self-taught aspect, that's pretty good. It works perfectly good if you were a character from a great or even a minor, any minor clan school that you think, or great clan school that you think has a weapon focus that is not modeled. Are you like a Matsu who went to a particular dojo that was all about the spear? Wandering Blade works perfectly well for that. So it can be useful for a lot of those. I like it overall. There's a Student of the Talon, which is tagged Bushi Shinobi. This is basically the generic Ronin archer school. I think it's Shinobi because they can get skulk to start with, so they can like hide, and they have some stealth elements. But mostly they are about picking up on ranged kata, especially all the new ones that are in this book that we'll talk about later. They're good for any kind of school you think that is not modeled, that is ranged focused. Like if you wanted to homebrew playing a Wasp character, since they are not mechanically supported at all yet, Student of the Talon works fine. Any other characters who have a ranged build. Their school ability is pretty good. It's kind of like a hybrid of the Hida and Kakita core book ones, but focused on range 2 to 5. So they don't necessarily replace each other. It's just, they're very good at archery specifically because of ranged. So the treasure hunters in here, that's kind of one of the problematic ones. First of all, I will say, as the developers themselves have said, there's a lot of GM arbitration in this game. If you're a GM, don't just let a player pick up a treasure hunter for no reason. If you're a player, don't be an asshole and just pick up treasure hunter because you want the school ability, which unfortunately increases your vigilance and focus by your school rank at all times unless you're compromised. I feel like somebody may have missed whoever wrote this school may not have been also working on the social objectives later in this book and some other things, because while for initiative, sure, that's cool. For intrigues and a lot of fights, that's a little BS to increase your vigilance or your focus so much. That makes it very, very hard to target you with certain techniques or to beat you in certain social objectives. If you want my Omega's house rule, assuming you want anybody to actually play a treasure hunter, because it's kind of a weird niche, I would say on initiative and during narrative scenes. That kind of gives them the benefit of what their school ability is actually supposed to do, which is you're really good at sensing and responding to danger. Not necessarily that people can't manipulate you socially. Otherwise, overall, this school is just kind of another another take on the Worldly Ronin Bushi courtier type thing. Like, you get some negotiation abilities, and you get a few social tricks, but also you can take care of yourself in a fight, right? Like, it's kind of almost like playing a rogue type character in L5R, which is weird. Then there's the School of Leaves. This is kind of an alternative. If you don't want to play like a mercenary shinobi, School of Leaves can work, or arguably even a generic Kolat Saboteur. They get access to all the core book ninjutsus. They get access to a couple of new ranged katas and stuff, a couple of other dirty tricks, and they're focused on being in obscuring terrain and stuff like that. They get fire air. For instance, talking about other uses, if you wanted to play like a peasant agitator, kind of like a Kolat, but not a Kolat, School of Leaves works perfectly good for that. Like if you wanted to play a perfect land sect like agitator, it's perfectly fine. And alternatively, if you want to play a generic shinobi build, if you don't want to be mercenary ninja. For instance, if I was to say let somebody play a Cat Clan member, I would say probably pick School of Leaves as a substitute school kind of thing. There is the Voice of the Wilds. That's our first Ronin Shugenja build. As this, it's really good. So their school ability lets you basically... You don't get free access to buy invocations. You get a couple of specific invocations in your tree, basically. Though they're a little limited. Like at rank 4, you can only buy rank 1 to 2 any invocations kind of stuff. Like, so that's cool. But as your school ability during downtime, you basically become a D&D type wizard caster. You pick a number of spells which you can perform as if you knew them, equal to total your school rank prereqs, equal to your school rank times 2, basically. So at rank 1, you could pick 1 rank 2, or, excuse me, a little burpee, 2 rank 1s kind of thing. But if you become compromised during an invocation, you suffer spiritual backlash automatically. So I like this one. This is, like I said, this is really good for a self-taught Shugenja, any kind of Ronin Shugenja. Arguably could work for certain smaller Shugenja dojos kind of thing. It's a decent school, and it does some really interesting things with being a Shugenja. You're more flexible than your counterparts, but a little bit more risky. There is the Artisan of the Rhodes. It's a generic artisan school. It really seems to depend on your campaign, but if you were running one where being an artisan mattered, it could be really good. Mystic of the Mountain is the kind of generic monk school, so you're not necessarily tied to like a specific fortunist belief or a Shinseist temple, or any of the samurai monks. It kind of lets you fill the role of that advisor monk type build. Their school ability is called Unexpected Wisdom. You basically can drop words of wisdom on somebody, just as kind of a limited number of times per school, so you can just, poke somebody and go, hey, wax on, wax off, and then boom, oh shit, I'm better. They got a couple of Kiho channeled in there, though they don't get them naturally, but they do get Kata, so arguably they are probably one of the best warrior monks out there because they can get some Kiho and get full Kata access. So after that, we leave the Ronin ones and move to some of the gaijin ones. There's Ujik Diviner, which I mentioned before is Sage. They only get access to earth and water invocations. They have the special ability to channel rituals. So they've got a couple of these, interesting tricks back and forth in certain selected spells. If you wanted an even more Death Priesty moto, you could probably do this trick. There's the Kamarist Shield Bearer, who lets you shield bash if somebody's trying to hit you, and they get a couple of different tricks you can use. They're also tagged as Sage. I'm not entirely sure why. I guess it's because there's a lot of weird emphasis in the Kamarist that, because of their religious elements, they have certain supernatural qualities kind of attributed to them by their faith and stuff. Or maybe it's just because they're really mad about sorcery. There's the Kamarist Alchemist, which is just a Sage tradition. They're good at rituals, and there's a couple of specific rituals they can get access to that are Kamarist in origin, which makes sense. The Ivory Kingdom's Sage tradition. So those are those people who really study their inner energy and meditate and stuff. They are a Sage Bushi skill. They get primary access to Kiho. They get Kata Kiho and rituals kind of build. Which means there are some table errors in here. I see Bell of Resolve not marked correctly, but hey, welcome to FFG. But they're basically, and they can activate Kiho for other people as kind of their thing, so they can spread their kind of ability to other people. There's the Ivory Kingdom's Dancing Blades tradition, which is, on the one hand, it's just a generic Ivory Kingdom's Bushi, but also it lets you learn a summon mantra for an implement, which is a thing we'll talk about later. But that in general seems to me like they're kind of I really do want to focus on an implement thing in this school, so I'm going to pick that up. Then they, go into the rest of the questions. So you can, get your ring increases. You can work on your past, like what's in your past, because you do that instead of a duty. There's a percentage table for this. There's a lot of percentage tables in this story, in this book, honestly. So I think that's kind of the intent, is that you can generate these things a lot quicker if you don't have ideas right away. Then you've got your ninja, obviously. You can, something like, what is your character known for? That kind of is the whole, you get glory, or you can get skills. What do you think of Bushido, for instance? There's a random ninja table also on the next page. Basically, how do you feel about Bushido kind of question. Then there's all the advantages and disadvantages questions, your mentor. You get what's your most prized possession, which is kind of get a special item. How do you react to special situations? What are your relationships to other people, so you can still get a gift? And then shared history with the group. Now, this is an interesting thing. So, who have you hung out with? Build relationships that way, and then you can work out a bond. There are both, either I think the bonds in Courts of Stone or the new ones in this work there. Who raised you? What's your name? There's a random name table. And then, how should you die? There's some new distinctions, which are kind of cool. Like, you can, be more leaderly. You can have a dashing scar. You can be scrappy. You can get some specific passions, which are kind of neat, like passion for attention, which is pretty funny. Passion for honest work. There's some new disadvantages, debts, bullheaded, duties, many mouths, which is the like you have a lot of dependents. New anxieties like coming storm, eyes of many, stuff like that. And then this is the section outlining how to create a gaijin culture. So, figure out what your culture might like, what's their terrain like, how does it all work, and then basically, as a result of that, turn that into, picking the various skills and whatnot, and matching stuff. Then there's a section for several pages about building a school. We're not going to go too deep in this, but this basically codifies how the school works. Basically, like, it codifies all there's a breakdown of all the tag roles. There's, various steps to do all the things. And there's examples of a lot of these, like, school abilities, mastery abilities, skill choices, etc. And kind of the outline of who gets what. Most of this you can interpolate from just reading, but it's nice to see it all spelled out because while we do know that the RPG is going to continue, while that was in debate, I think that these rules were kind of nice to just give people the right thing. And, like it even says, beyond peasant and Ronin schools, you can exist for great clan, minor clan, vassal family, gaijin schools, etc. And this is deep enough that if you guys want to, let me know. I might do a video that kind of walks through these steps and kind of builds something, and maybe we even could, like, kit bash from the create a gaijin culture to, like, turn that into minor clan creation. Though I'm reasonably sure that will also be a system at some point where there will be an example of how to walk through, like, okay, so what does a minor clan do? What's their thing? And then out of that will come, like, okay, so calculate their status in the something to something range, figure out what ring increase they get, etc., etc. What book that will come in, I don't know, but I'm pretty sure that will be a book eventually. So they do have some of these, example school abilities. You can calculate the ring bonuses, which, by the way, is pretty interesting because the ring bonus is suggested based on what type of school it is. So, like, Artisan should get fire or water, Bushi should get earth, Courtier or Shinobi should get air, Monk or Sage should get void. Whatever element your school is focused on, should get that one. And then the second one is whatever the school is known for. So, for instance, if you're an artisan school that's known for patience, traditions, or resilience, you might go fire, earth, or water, earth. If you're a Bushi school that's known for precision, grace, and manners, you might go for earth, air. And obviously, these are just suggested. You can go with whatever makes sense. But it's to kind of help people make sure they're not fucking themselves over. It talks about the school choices, the technique choices. It mentions that you should not just hand out ninjutsu and maho access because those are for schools that would have generic access to that are kind of shifty. Like, again, talking about narrative controls. If anybody ever found out that you were a mercenary ninja, you're in deep shit, right? So there's that. Starting techniques kind of outlines those. Technique groups, mastery abilities, and then starting outfit, names, etc. So then after that, we go into Chapter 3, New Player Options, which has a lot of the good shit. So there's a lot of new techniques in Path of Waves, and this is one of the reasons why this is a good book for everybody. And on the other hand, so on the one hand, it's obviously, some of it's kind of like a marketing tactic, like, well, how do we make this book bigger so we can sell it to more people? Well, new techniques. But also, it works because, it helps one fill out the book, but also it can make sense to introduce a lot of new options and be like, because, Musha Shugyo is the warrior's pilgrimage. There's a lot of different elements in this that could be much more combat-based than others. And it works to kind of create new stuff. So you got a couple of new General Kata. Iron Shell style is good for anybody who wants to be guarding. You've got Mind's Edge, which is a nifty new technique that duelists might want. Basically, whenever you perform an action in Void Stance that doesn't require a check, you can make a meditation check to reduce this next strife you take. There's Thunderous Hooves and Rider's Haste, so there's some new katas which make sense for writing-based schools, while also not necessarily being outright like most of the time they come up, you probably could have taken them anyway. Void's Embrace is another really interesting style. So it only works in a duel or skirmish, but when you make a meditation void check, you can spend opportunity, and then the next time you're dealt damage by a character or suffer a critical strike from them, you record a number, and if the number you chose is higher than the damage or severity, nothing happens. But if it's lower, you reduce it by the amount you said to an amount of 0, and if it becomes 0, they come strife. So this is like a rank 5 technique. It's really neat to it's just that perfect dodge or perfect read kind of thing. If you can actually pull it off, it's a really useful technique for high-level duels where things can get a little spooky. Then there's a whole boatload of new close combat kata, which basically, if there's a weapon type or a ring or whatever, there's a lot of stuff. For instance, Boar's Wrath style procs if you're engaged, or enraged, and not incapacitated, so that's really good for Matsu. I think that'll give them something new to do, and can work for other schools. There's new attacks for Cumbersome, like Broombaker style. You can swing using a polearm or something, or a snaring weapon, basically. You can block projectile attacks with decent stuff. Flashing Steel Strike is a big one. This is an error fire check that lets you basically give your opponent a choice if you can beat their vigilance. They can either receive strike equal to your ranks and performance in the day's condition, or they can take a critical strike with severity equals your weapon's deadliness. So some people have said this is really good for duels. I think that really depends on the type of duel and how you're executing it. It's a really good technique in general for lots of schools, especially if you're error fire-based. Kikita and Bayushi might like this a lot. Actually, I think Dragon get fire too. So all the traditional duelist schools probably will enjoy this. But remember, it's still an error fire, so it's not like you can do the classic draw and cut, and it's its own technique, so you can't do it as part of another attack. But still, it's a great setup to be like, well, okay, you're either going to take a boatload of strife and become dazed, or you can take a critical strike. Very useful, especially for battlefield duels. There's a couple new Iaijutsu cuts. You can draw your sheath as well as your sword, so you don't have to draw 2 weapons at once. You can kind of bonk them a little bit. Then there's the reverse draw, which some people are confused by. I think the intent of the reverse draw is it's kind of your ultimate Iaijutsu technique, because you become disoriented when you do it, but it scales, so you do physical damage equal to your weapon's deadliness +1 for every 2 bonus successes, so it kind of scales like Crossing Cut does. Its TN is Vigilance, so it can be used as a finishing blow in a pinch with scaling. And if you spend 2 opportunities, if the target becomes incapacitated, they suffer a critical strike equal to deadliness plus bonus successes. So if you can pull it off, you can do a lot of damage and possibly incapacitate a target and crit them, so it can be used if you're very good. If you're not good, you're going to look like an asshole. Landside Strike is basically the earth and water version of Flashing Steel. If your opponent gets to pick, either they take fatigue and fall prone, or they swap stance and are immobilized, which is good. Any more techniques which can force your opponent to switch stances are good. Laughing Fox style is pretty funny. This is one you may have heard about. You can spend a void point and make an martial arts unarmed air check to retarget an attack to somebody else at range 0 to 1 and possibly move or make them prone or something. I will say, I think it's pretty balanced. You need to spend a void point. 2, you need to be in air, because it's an air check. And it's based on unarmed, which means you got to spread your skills out unless you're already an unarmed-based school. Then it's, got vigilance and other modifiers. So it's pretty fun, but definitely worth the high-level effect for the fact that you can just defensively do it. And then, like I said, there's a whole bunch of new stuff for polearms and blunt weapons especially. Like Piercing Bolt, Snapping Branch, Swirling Tempest. That's another way to do AoE. Thunderous Blows is a blunt weapon check. There's a couple of new unarmed techniques in here, like Reckless Lunge, flying kick, diving tackle. That's pretty funny. Whirling Sweep is you throw a guy into another guy kind of thing. So there's two techniques. One of them is ranged, but we'll talk about the first one here. Rushing Ox style is when you maneuver. As a result of maneuvering, if you have fire or water opportunities, you can make a strike action with one of your attacks, but you have to move towards them. So basically, it gives you an opportunity to charge. And the ranged version of this is Swirling Viper. It gives you bonus. You can basically move back and shoot so long as you're moving back from a target. Pretty neat. Where is actually? Is there a misprint in my PDF? Hold on. I gotta search for something. I'm surprised nobody's found this if it is an error. Yeah. I think I got a misprint. So the Kamarist, and I think I've seen the pictures of it, of like people taking pictures. The Kamarist school lists the Iron Shield technique. In my PDF, we go from Flashing Steel to Iaijutsu to Lance Stride. So that's interesting. We're missing a technique. I'll have to see if anybody else has anything to say about that. The beauty about PDFs is that can be fixed, but keep an eye on that. But there's also Twin Stream style, which means incentivizes dual wielding. Very useful if you're on Miyamoto or anything. And then there's a bucket full of ranged combat kata. I talked about this on the Enter the Dojo Forever Yushi Death Dealer. There's buckets of it. You can shoot at people you can't see. You can do Falling Heavens shot, which is you can fire an arrow up Princess Mononoke style and have it come down. You can shoot at their legs to do different things. Swirling Viper I mentioned already. And then there's Wasp Spite, which is basically if you miss an attack that's in air or void, you can choose another target and have them be the correct target instead. There's a handful of new Shuji. Bellow of Resolve is... A lot of these, by the way, are once per scene. So, like, Bellow of Resolve is you can tap an ally who's at compromised or incapacitated and kind of push them back below it. You can do Look Out as a rank 3 technique, which means when you make a check to resist an effect, if you're in Earth stance, you can make other allies switch their stance. There's a very interesting rank 5 Earth Shuji called Mentor's Guidance, which lets another character benefit from one of your Kata, Shuji, or Ninjutsu. So there's some very interesting tricks here in air. There's Flowering Deceptions, where you pick two characters who are not hostile to each other, and the TN of one of their checks, their next check goes up, and TN of another one goes down by 2. And I believe you can target yourself and an ally, basically. But it's a trick to, like, you set up a scheme or something, so that allies get in their own ways or some stuff. You can also do Pack Gambit. Basically pick a character, and if you succeed, everybody who attacks that character can get assistance on an attack or tap their disadvantages. Ruse of the Moon's Reflection lets you swap initiatives. There's a Water Shuji Eyes Up, which can be used to drop a character's focus and raise their vigilance for the rest of a scene. And there's a Fire version, which is the reverse of this, drop their vigilance to increase their focus. By the way, both of these can be used as debuffs if you want. They no longer say they have to target friendliness, so you can use this to try and manipulate stuff. There's a pretty basic water one called Fluent Bargaining, which means when you make commerce water checks for jobs, you can increase the pay. That's only really useful to Ronin, but it's fun. You can also do Watch My Back. Fire Shuji gets access to Goading Taunt, kind of a thing, so you can directly kind of make people forced to attack you. And there's some Void Shuji, which are really cool. You can do Wanderer's Resolve, so this is basically a superpowered version of Courtier or Warrior's Resolve, but you have to be in Void stance. You take a support action in Void stance. You recover 3 Strife and 3 Fatigue, plus 3 Fatigue and 3 Strife for each compromised or incapacitated character with whom you share a bond, but you have to be in Void stance, obviously. But it's a strictly better way than those two on their own to get stuff back if you need to, because it does both. So depending on your build, whether or not you might be in Void stance, that can be superior to either of those options. There's also Tonight I Am Your Opponent. You can force your way into a duel or clash. And Bond of Heroes lets you heal allies who have bonds with you. Then there's rituals. So there's a small handful of Kamarist rituals, which are their various alchemical concoctions. They do a lot of interesting things, but that's not really worth breaking down every one of those individually. There's an Ivory Kingdoms one, Cleansing of Coral and Gold, which is their kind of version of Cleansing Ritual and stuff. There is a very Ronin-themed one, though, called Wayfarer's Path, which is basically whenever you don't know where you should go, you can roll a meditation check to kind of get the direction of something you're looking for. And then there's a big section on celestial implements. So, on the top level, these are kind of the various Astras and Astraharis and other, various weird, wacky, powerful implements from Indian mythology, of which there are many, many. But most importantly, there's an important thing when talking about themes and stuff and pop culture is that there's a lot of syncretism in Japan with China and with India because of the movement of Buddhism and the like. Thus, while they are set up as, hey, here's a bit of specifically Ivory Kingdom's flavor to kind of spice up your things, like, what if you were playing a wandering Ivory Kingdom sage with a celestial implement who happens to be on, like, Rokugan on a quest or something? That could be really interesting and weird. But you could totally port these rules and the way they function to fortunist elements, like something given to you by, like, a celestial tool from a fortune, or even possibly ancestral weapons. And kind of it's an even more higher level than basic Nemoranai type stuff. And there's a lot of boons, there's a lot of, detections and effects, and then how you introduce them, and then some samples. It's a very interesting scheme, and who knows, maybe we could, build one as an example, though there are several. But that's, again, different discussion. The next section in Chapter 3 is called Hand to Mouth. It's very important because it's only a couple of pages, but it basically talks about how Ronin work with trade and how samurai should be working with trade and kind of how they go back and forth, wandering, how they make money. And then we get into new gears and items. So, okay. By default, the normal shit that's in here, that's okay. Yes, the Urumi is pretty good. It's a 4/5 weapon that's razor-edged and snaring, but it's also cumbersome, and it's rarity 9 and 50 koku, so, and it's range 1 to 2, so where are you getting a whip sword, basically? It's a really cool weapon, but that's a kind of a big deal. There's also the Talwar as kind of a scimitar type thing. There's a couple of native, though, Rokugani weapons, like the chain whip and the sling. Though, I don't know, No, okay, so the sling was already 3/3. Yeah, it's fair. I was just wondering if it was the same. It is in there. They officially printed the sling stats. There's also chain whips and some other stuff. A couple of gaijin shields. So the thing is, though, that some people pointed out, the improvised weapons are a little weird. They use specific profiles as kind of a, hey, here's if you wanted to carry one of these as, for its mundane purpose, but also use it to hit people. And they've done a couple of those, though usually they're listed as gear, for instance, the what's the exact name? Let me find the personal item list. It's the pen. Sekihitsu. The pencil stick, which you can use as a weapon, basically, which has, DLS 4 concealable. Sure, it's range 0, dam 0, but still, it's yeah. Okay, that's pretty gnarly, a damage 4 pencil. There's a deadliness 4 pencil. So, improvised weapons can be pretty sharp, but if I were to speculate, and who knows, I may make a forum thread about this so other people can find out if they don't watch my video, but it seems like either the editors missed this or the people making the tables missed it or however it worked out. So, yes, on the one hand, it is typical for some weapons to get increased deadliness when two-handed, right? That's not crazy, but they may have missed that there's kind of a theme there, which is that typically only bladed or otherwise sharpened weapons get increased deadliness. Blunt weapons usually get increased damage, and unfortunately a lot of these improvised weapons do both. Other than that, most of them are pretty sensible. The Iron Sheath stat line, that's literally a boken. That's fine. That's durable and it's not even mundane. It's the same damage, but it's not mundane, but it is tough, kind of thing. The scroll case is just a tonfa, which is kind of makes sense because of how it's described. But I don't think that necessarily just because you double-fisted it, it should get +1 deadliness, Same with, sake bottles and cups. Okay, higher deadliness makes sense. I understand throwing them,
too, and I get that what we're kind of going for is that they're glass or ceramics, right? They're pretty sharp, but they don't need both +2 deadliness to be as deadly as a katana and also razor edged. Like, I think just calling them mundane razor edged works, because you're throwing with force, they might penetrate armor or the edge could shatter, but also they could pierce through and cause serious injuries. They don't need +2 deadliness. Same with like the loot. Throwing a chair is not the same as throwing a knife at somebody. Deadliness 4 kind of thing. So if you want Omega's approved house rule, anytime that it brings up increased deadliness, just drop it. With the exception of, so the boat ore is kind of weird because we have in the Mantis downloadable PDF, we have the Eku, which is supposed to be a weaponized boat ore. That's two-handed and is just is 6/4 damage. So I think there may have been a copy-paste error, and the boat ore should be +1 damage, +3 damage, +1 deadliness, because that literally makes it an Eku when you're two-handing it. That would make more sense to me. So that might just be a copy-paste error. Otherwise, a lot of the raw stats are acceptable. You'll just want to be careful about letting people just pick these up, right? Like, an Arumi is a pretty good sword, but it is rarity 9, so, like, same with the Kamarist Heavy Shield, that's rarity 9. Don't just hand these out for free, There's some new personal effects, talk about travel rations, dice kits, a lot of new professional kits. And then, interestingly enough, there's some new forbidden items, which are pretty neat. So there's the Thievery Kit, basically burglary tools, which can be very useful to lots of people. There's how to get a concealed sheath for your weapon, which can be pretty useful. Basically hide your weapon as in a cane kind of thing. And then there's the Chandu, kind of like opium blocks, ready to smoke sort of thing. Or not even ready to smoke, but like the pure form of opium, and then the poppy tea lower form. There's a couple of new item patterns, which are for gaijin stuff. So you can get the Spirit of the Kamarist, which means that when you make... Basically, this gives armor, increased supernatural resistance. You can do the Yodha pattern, which gives them a kind of an anti-tainted effect, and the Kokijin Heart of the Wind pattern, which increases polearms. And then we get into a couple of really good chapters that I'm probably going to talk about in brief because they're just so detailed. But basically, we get Twin Blessings Village and Hirosaka. These are kind of the reverse of Emerald Empire. So Emerald Empire did have chapters which detailed villages and cities and castles and all that, but they went very broad. Like, they had lots of little examples, but not a lot of super drilled on detail. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5 are super focused on, okay, here's a very specific example of a village or city which you could reasonably tweak or reposition to fit in your campaign. So Twin Blessings Village is normally where it is, but you could move it around. They talk about how the village might be different in different clans, including using Dragonfly as kind of an example. There's a map that's pretty good, which shows lots of various elements. There's general geography. There's kind of some talk about some threats, the various landmarks of the village, the names and descriptions of some key villagers who are useful to kind of help you fish out, all the other stuff. The various land. It talks about their resources, their trade, etc. And then it has a lot of optional extra encounters and important characters. Like, there's one for the village leader. There's, the sake brewery. There's some supernatural creatures you might run into. All of these are filled, interspersed occasionally with the old Adventure Seed, tab lines. Various other, little encounters and stuff going on. Kind of working out what's good for people and kind of where you can do. So you can, on the one hand, you can easily use it as a, complete, literal drop-in, or you can just pick and choose various elements that you might include. If you want to just drop this Nekomata and Adventure Seed in something, you can do that anywhere. And there's a little blop that the Perfect Land Sect might come in. And then Hirosaka, it's nominally an Imperial holding, but they give you guidelines for how to cap them out. There's a big map of that. And Hirosaka, by the way, is technically Chapter 5. We shouldn't, too focus on that. But it talks about where it could be if it was other holdings, the relationship of Ronin and Gaijin there, alternate geographies and elements, and then there's a couple of page breakdown of the local economy and how that works, so where commodities are produced, where they're taxed, where they're stored and distributed kind of stuff. various elements of local economy to Hirosaka. There's a table in here which is commodities of what type and rough their price when they're in good supply or when they're not in good supply, and then notes. So, like, hey, you want to buy some food? Basic foods are probably 1 to 2 zeni, for a day. But if there's a food shortage, it might be 3 to 5 zeni. Luxury foods go up to, like, a bu. Drinks, consumer goods, luxury goods, tools, utility items. Not about horses, but, you kind of get the idea. That's very helpful. And on the one hand, so obviously, depending on how you're running the game, Clan Samurai might never need this table. Ronin definitely do, but also it can be helpful to kind of let people understand like what their value is. Most of these, except for luxury goods, which includes, artworks, wall hangings, shoji screens, and stuff like that, none of these items usually hit over a koku except maybe premium imported sakes and wines when they're in low supply, right? So then there's a lot of the descriptions of the locations in Hirosaka, the people, notable people tabs and stuff like that, what kind of profiles you should use for these characters, and then the specific ones like the governor, the chancellor, the magistrates, various other elements and people, criminals, local legends and stuff with lots of adventure hooks. And then chapter 6 is kind of the game master chapter, how to outline how do we do all this stuff, So running games for outcasts and Ronin and gaijins even, how to handle all that stuff. The base pay that a lot of Ronin get, how to treat a job as a thing with rarity that you're trying to acquire, So, like, for instance, acting as a sailor, so getting crewed aboard a vessel if you want to run a Ronin pirate game, that's like rarity 2, but only pays like 1 bu a week. Whereas if you can get an administrative duty suitable towards artisans, scholars, or trade skills, that pays like 1 bu a day, but the rarity is 8. It's a lot harder to get. And then they have various risks and stuff. And then they have another table which is like typical modifiers. So like, who pays better? Crab, dragon, and phoenix pay flat rates. Lions pay half because they're assholes. But crane, scorpion, and unicorn pay times 1.5. And it has various roles they want. Hey, if you're a huge Lion fan, I'm sorry. This book's you're probably not gonna like this book because, as you might expect from the Lion, who hold honor in high regard, they kind of shit on Ronin a lot. The whole section about talking about, like, way back in chapter 1, talking about what different clans' relation is like, oh yeah, the Lion totally hire Ronin. Usually they fit them into their military schemes as part of basically the disposable shock troops that nobody cares about, and the sergeants and captains are really horrible and abusive to them, but it's a living kind of thing. Talks about designing Ronin's personal code, how they should view Bushido, what kind of tenets they should appreciate, how to do that different way. Some interesting opportunities for how to use unmasking, like as suggested, where you still obviously take a risk when you unmask, but also you can, basically get new unmasking tactics which make sense for people. There's a couple of new social objectives, which again are kind of, while they do make sense for Ronin, they're being endeared, gain an audience, and gather information. They can also work perfectly well for a regular class, regular clan samurai. There's a couple of titles. You can be a Ghostlands warrior, perfect land sect member, in service to a lord, which is basically that's for Ronin or others who are like hired by a lord kind of thing. And there's a Astridhari, so that's the title you get if you want to get a magic item. So they have some bonds. They talk about the bond system, how they work, and there's some new bonds added. So there's Old Flame, so you can kind of like, it lets you heal fatigue better, but heal strife worse kind of stuff. There's Partner, for literally buddy cop stuff. Their bond abilities calls I always got your back. There's Protector and Ward bond. And honestly, the bond type stuff is totally a thing you could actually think out and do in different ways. Rival is reprinted, and then they've got Wanderer's Fellowship. Because there's a rule where you take a bond with everybody in the team. That I think could be a good one if you want to emphasize character relationships, or not necessarily with the team, but everybody starts with a bond. That can be a pretty good rule overall. And also, I know a lot of people are like, "Oh, it's so expensive. You're wasting your EXP." Well, hey, guess what, motherfuckers? Now there's multiple techniques which are based on your bonds. They give you bonuses if you're dealing with people who are bonded to you or only target them. So there's a reason to actually take bonds now that's mechanical and not purely role-playing besides the other abilities. So, yeah, that's pretty good. I think that a lot of these new bonds are good, and just in general, the way the game is like, hey, bonds should be meaningful. Keep an eye out, Then they talk about, gaijin stuff, building gaijin characters, introducing them, playing them, or having NPCs. Don't be an asshole. Don't do funny voices and accents that are really racist. There is a sizable section on the general design of the Ivory Kingdoms. This doesn't drill down as deep as, say, like Hirosaka or Twin Blessings Village, but is like, hey, here's some names of some features, here's what some terrain is like, here's what the climate and people are like, here's what a couple of the different factions are like. Apparently, some of the Naga are just chilling in the Ivory Kingdoms. They're out and about, they're not hiding. Mentions their big city, but there's no map of it because that'll be saved for a different thing. There's some sections on the Ghostlands and how to get in there, and guess what? That's just like the Shadowlands, only shittier. There's some names, but not stat lines for some new creatures that appear in the Ghostlands. Though you can use pretty typical stuff, like Vitala are evil spirits that reanimate corpses, so that's basically just a zombie or revenant, like in Rokugan. There's the Boot, it's B-H, Boot, I don't know. I'm not familiar with the phenome, sorry. That can include any number of evil creatures, so I'm just like, so goblins. Stuff like that. There's a list of some educational, inspirational works for Ivory Kingdoms-related stuff. There's like about 3 and 4 act structures, campaign styles, getting inspired and where to find your inspiration. That's got that sidebar I mentioned, the word about accuracy, talking about how, don't literally apply it to history, but, apply it to things that feel correct. Further inspirational works. And then basically themes and tones for Ronin games. A lot of good GMing advice that I'm not going to go into detail, but it works. There's the Trinket Table, which that's something they mentioned earlier, that maybe you can get a trinket as kind of your personal item. And there's a percentage table for it, which includes some cool examples of stuff. Most of which do nothing mechanical, but are neat. Then there's a basic bitch name table. None of these are super deep, but they work. And I think they're mostly gender neutral. Then there's also some Ivory Kingdoms names, and Ujik names, and Kamaris names and stuff. And then Chapter 7 is non-player characters. This includes a couple of new templates. So, for instance, that makes sense, I should say, for Ronin-type characters. There's a survivalist because you might be in the woods. There's a desperate template to kind of represent somebody who's in a bad way. And then there's a bunch of new NPC profiles. Some of them are, some of them are criminals. Some of them are, peasants. Some of them are samurai stuff. They have various different levels of conflict and danger and kind of approaches which you can apply to things. There's a bunch of new animals. If you wanted to ride a camel or something. A couple of different things going on. Like macaques. Stuff like that. Rhino. Then there's a couple of spiritual things. Creatures that have, the classic, I'm an animal that's lived for 100 years or something, so I'm huge. Including a giant octopus, weird octopus men, hinotamas, kappas, a couple of rakshasas things, tiny manifest kami, and then that's the outro. So yeah, overall, like I said, this is a good companion to Emerald Empire. It is a 100% must-buy if you are planning on running a Ronin-type game. But also just in general, I think it's got a lot of useful advice about themes, about campaign styles. You can apply a lot of those themes to great clan games, or even minor clan games. Some game masters will definitely appreciate the focused, drill-down examples of a village and a city, like taking a specific example and either transplanting it wholesale into your game, or tweaking it slightly, but keeping a lot of the structure can be very helpful to some people. Obviously, if you're going to do anything with the Ivory Kingdoms right now, this is your major source. I will say it doesn't go into super detail about the Sand Road and the Ujik lands or the Kamaris Kayafate. They're probably saving a lot of those details for a future unicorn-focused sourcebook. And obviously, if you actually buy the Unicorn Novella physically, that appendix will give you a lot of fluff outline you need, as well as examples of other gaijin cultures you can use. It's, again, if you want to do something like playing a gaijin character, that's pretty important. But overall, I think a lot of the advice can be applicable to other stuff, too. The schools can be useful. to replace some things that make sense. You may learn from the alternate way they do 20 questions. You may decide you want to incorporate some of the bonds. There are a couple of, mechanical glitches that you may want to smooth over as GM. Like, you may want to think whether or not you're going to errata or allow Treasure Hunter at your table, if it even makes sense for your game. You may need to think about what you're going to do with those improvised weapons and such not. But a lot of the stuff, like, heck, I mentioned this earlier, celestial weapons. That's a really neat and very thematic thing for Ivory Kingdoms, but also because of stuff like Synchronicity and popular culture, cultural osmosis, you can totally work out how to apply those to Rokugan with a very minimal effect. Literally just change the names, and it makes sense, right? And they can be anything. They don't need to be like weapons. They can be other mundane stuff too. You could use this for like great artifacts of the clan founders, the Kami. All kinds of things. And we'll see how they compare because Celestial Realms is supposed to include all the ancestral swords. So we'll kind of see what they do with that, if that kind of adds up. But it's definitely a higher tier level of doing magic weapons, with kind of the conceit that, like, dude, have you ever read Hindu mythology? Like, have you read the Ramayana or the Mahabharata? It's anime bullshit. Check out other videos on our channel about Fate Grand Order stuff for more, because, man, some things. But yeah, so, like, I think there's an important tone to this book, which is, like, other than the usual don't be an asshole tone, which is like, hey, you can draw inspiration from a lot of places, and you can do a lot of different things with this setting, and we're not really the boss of you when it comes to that, right? Like, it's not, L5R is not and never has been a rigid game, at least this edition. It's very flexible, very fluid. Your GM might have to bust his chops a little bit more than usual to get stuff down, but you can do a lot with the game. So, like, if somebody was into this game and I was, like, telling them to buy books, it's Core Book, Emerald Empire, Path of Waves. Like, get those first. And then maybe if you think, like if you're definitely running a Shadowlands theme or otherwise dealing with those things campaign, you definitely need Shadowlands. You might do it if you, like, somebody in the group probably needs Shadowlands for maybe the school options to look at, maybe some of the techniques. The item patterns are very useful, for instance, and some of the other stuff in there. But it's not necessarily essential. Same with Courts of Stone. That's got very good advice for running courtly intrigue games, for building courts quickly, for dealing with, espionage-type stuff, and has some cool schools in there, and got some interesting tools, but not necessarily essential. Path of Waves is like, yeah, just the fluff and a lot of the thematic stuff in here is very essential. Overall, good book. Glad I bought it. Glad it came out. Super excited for Celestial Realms personally, but that's because my campaign that is still in dev is, one, definitely more spiritual or mystically themed than some. I've basically mentally pitched it as kind of like, what if you were Jade Magistrates instead of Emerald Magistrates? But the Jade Magistrature doesn't exist right now. There's no Jade Champion kind of thing. So it's kind of that with a slight dash of Phoenixisms that might be actually useful to me to, like, incorporate into some of this stuff and see what else is in there. So that's cool. And yeah, let me know if you want me to do a creating a school example video, because I will totally waste way too much time making that video. Alright, well, we're here. We're at the end. So I'll go ahead and throw that one out there. And basically we'll wrap up here. Stay tuned for future videos. There will be a Enter the Dojo coming. It'll be Shinjo Outrider at this point, for sure. We need to do another Unicorn School and kind of wrap that up. And though expect probably to get some integration from maybe Path of Waves in there. We'll see. Stay tuned for future announcements on Celestial Realms. Be sure to keep up with the fiction and stuff, both novellas and whatnot. I don't really know when the Crab novellas due out, but I guess I'll pick it up sometime and read it. And I've been talking for over an hour, and my voice is starting to go, so let's go ahead and wrap this up. There's probably some other outro bullshit I could throw in here, but I'm not gonna. So hey, if you like this video, go ahead and give it a like. If you have any comments, leave them in the comment section down below. You can also join our Discord, that link is in the description, or on our channel page as always. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you can always get our latest videos, L5R, book reviews, news, etc. Enter the Dojo, our series where I do deep dives on schools and kind of how they interact with the rules and the fluff. You can also check out our other videos, like our podcast What's Up and stuff, where we talk about RPGs and our actual plays. There will be L5R actual plays someday, I swear. I said that about Star Wars for a long time, and then it actually happened, and we're like 11 sessions in. And of course, if you're new here and haven't already subscribed, be sure to hit that bell for notifications so you always know when we post a new video or when we stream or anything like that. Keep that out. As of the time I'm recording, my co-host on the channel, Lucky, has been streaming some Sekiro. That's a great thing to check out. He'll probably be doing some future streams in that, and hopefully that's all archived and stuff. You can pull that up. And, of course, it gets to the front of the show. Consider supporting us on Patreon. You can get access to episodes early and lots of very goodies, and really helps us out. All right, I will see you guys on the wave road path. It sounded so much better in my head. Damn it.